I hate this channel.
No! No!
Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be revamping a previous build of mine for Season 14 and showing you guys just how potent this can actually become, and in my opinion, it's even better than it was before. So if you guys remember my God of Thunder build, it was one of the very first builds I actually made, and it was something I was incredibly proud of because I really looked to a lot of different sources to try to make the most potent build possible. And in my opinion, with combination of a few new weapons as well as some seasonal mods from our seasonal artifact, it's become even better. And I'm going to show you just how crazy this build can get. So starting off, we're using the same super as we did for the previous God of Thunder video, and we're using Middle Tree Striker Titan, or Code of the Missile. And primarily, we're going to be taking advantage of the damage bonus that this had gotten in previous seasons and combining it with CUIRASS of the Falling Star to do incredible boss damage. Our whole goal for this build is simply getting our super back as fast as possible. And we look to a few different sources in order to actually do this. So before I start giving any weapon recommendations and suggestions, or simply just what I flat out use for this build, let's break down the armor itself. On our helmet, we're going to be utilizing Supercharged. This is essentially to bring our Charged with Light stacks even higher, increasing the effects of other Charged with Light mods we're going to be using with this build. I would say this is a requirement just because of the potency that this actually brings in with other mods that I'll get into in a second. But I'm also utilizing Ashes to Assets with this build. I'm going to be using 2 just to get the most potency that we can out of our grenade. If you want to rock 1 and then use a Finder instead, or use a different seasonal mod, you totally can. But this is something I recommend just to make sure that every grenade that we end up throwing is going to contribute to us getting our super back even faster. We're also going to be using on our gauntlets Energy Converter. This is a must. You're going to be seeing later on, we're going to try to have as many stacks of Charged with Light as we can. And with this in place, when we have a total of 5 stacks of Charged with Light, this can basically instantly get us to almost 50% of our super. This is where we're going to be getting most of our super energy from. And the other aspects of this build are either going to help us with our grenade itself or help us with the intellect and super gain after this has already been achieved, because after you do hit 50%, you can't actually proc this anymore. But we're also be combining this with Fastball just because I personally like the quality of life that Fastball gives me. But I'm also using Impulse Recycler, which is another seasonal mod. This essentially grants final blows with your grenade increased energy regain from that grenade kill. Multiple copies of this do stack, but it's not something that is so incredibly potent that I've noticed. And honestly, I just think Fastball is just too good to actually pass up, simply because whenever I switch off of it, I often find myself missing grenade throws or not being able to hit enemies as far with my grenade because of that lack of grenade distance. So I just use this as quality of life, but if you want to double down on Impulse Recycler, you totally can. Multiple mods of Impulse Recycler do stack. Then to our chest piece, we're going to be rocking a new perk here called Firepower. And what Firepower does is it consumes 1 stack of Charged with Light when we throw our grenade and instantly gives us about a 1/5 or a 1/4 or so of our grenade energy back. This is again just to help us continually get our grenade, because that's going to be the primary mechanism for which we're getting a majority of our super back. This, I will say, does have some issues with Energy Converter. And this is the one thing I wanted to test before making this video, because I wasn't exactly sure how it would work. So if you notice, both Energy Converter and Firepower consume stacks of Charged with Light to affect our grenade and our super. So the main question you might be asking is, well, let's say you have 5 stacks of Charged with Light. Since Firepower only consumes 1 stack, does that mean that if you have Energy Converter on, it'll consume 1 stack, leaving you with 4, and then Energy Converter will actually use that remaining 4, or will Energy Converter override it and use all 5? Throughout multiple testings, I found that Energy Converter does override Firepower. So if you are below 50% of your super and you throw that grenade, Energy Converter will take all of your stacks of Charged with Light, regardless of how much super is needed to get to that 50%. But again, we're using Firepower for mainly after that 50% is used. One of the biggest problems I noticed with God of Thunder was simply after you had that 4 stacks of Charged with Light beyond 50% of your super, you weren't really doing anything with it, and the build itself wasn't something that benefited from just burning through a whole bunch of them, because you didn't want to limit it in the initial 50% and stop you from getting to that big portion with Energy Converter. But after you did have it, you didn't want to just leave 4 or 5 stacks of Charged with Light just sitting there. So this is what this is actually doing for us. And in the end, us using our grenade and using our weapons specifically is going to make up for those stacks of charge with light that we're occasionally spending for our grenade itself. So just to recap, energy converter will override firepower below 50%. After 50%, each time you throw your grenade, it consumes 1 stack of charge with light and then gives you a portion of your grenade back. I'm also launching a reserve perk just because I'm primarily using a grenade launcher for this build, and a few of the best recommendations I can specify are also grenade launchers. On our legs, we're going to be actually using charged up. Now I will make a point, if you want to actually switch this out for something like blast radius, you totally can. I'm actually using it on my mark, and I'll get into that in a second, but you can definitely double down on something like this, and each time you would normally get 1 stack of charge with light, you'll get 2. I'm personally using charged up just so we can get to that ×5, so it's even more potent at getting our super back for that initial 50%. I'm rocking this also with absolution, just so whenever we get a orb of power now, it'll actually give us our abilities back, our grenade, our melee, our barricade, everything. I'm also rocking a scavenger perk because, again, the seasonal artifact reduces the cost of this perk down to a 1. Very, very valuable in my opinion. And then finally, we're also utilizing breach and clear along with blast radius. Blast radius, again, allows us to become charged with light by defeating multiple combatants with our grenade launcher or a rocket launcher. And breach and clear basically provides a debuff of 30% to anything that is affected by our grenade. Overall, this is going to help increase the potency and how fast that we actually get our super back. And again, with our super, we're going to be utilizing our grenade to give us super energy through impact conversion. Whenever we actually hit someone with our melee, we're also going to be getting super energy back, and then we're going to be relying on energy converter with our grenade to get us super energy, as well as different weapons that we might use. A few comments that I saw in the last video that I want to address is why not go for a melee build? Impact conversion already gives you super energy from ballistic slam. Why not just double down on that and make a melee build? And the simple reason is that outside of the super, and especially with the new CUIRASS exotic, this is where it build starts to struggle with a melee based build, because with something like Thunder Crash, you're launching yourself into your opponents, and it's really hard to try to make a build that consistently regenerates off of that whenever there isn't really any serious survivability with that. So if you wanted to make a melee build with something like this, you totally could, but you're giving up that ease of use and survivability in order for something that I believe isn't extremely worth it. I think it's better to double down on this, use your grenade when you have it, and if you see an opportunity to use your melee, you totally can. But I think especially in higher end content like Nightfalls or Empire Hunts, for example, builds revolving around melee kills can start to struggle. If you want a more melee based build, I would recommend Worm God and Bottom Tree Striker, not necessarily with Thunder Crash. In fact, if you are looking for a melee build, look at my latest video before this one, show you how to do more than a Thunder Crash with CUIRASS damage in one punch. Back to this build though, and onto some weapon recommendations. I have a few. Primarily, we're going to be utilizing Salvager's Salvo. This is something that's not changed since the last video. It's an incredible energy grenade launcher, generates arc damage kills with chain reaction, and also we can use Demolitionist on it to increase the potency and get our grenade back. And again, when we are getting grenade kills, we're also becoming charged with light, and then we can use our grenade not only as a damage tool, but to get grenade energy back from using it, to get additional super energy back, and just overall increase the potency of this build. Now, as far as other weapons, I have a few I want to recommend. The first weapon I'm going to recommend is in the kinetic slot, and it's actually the new seasonal grenade launcher, the Ignition Code. Now, Ignition Code is actually a bit interesting. It can roll with a very large variety of different perks and different combinations that end up working really, really well. The one that I primarily use is Demolitionist and Surplus. Now, I want to point out you can also roll blinding grenades on this grenade launcher, which I think is one of the most underrated perks in the entire game, as it can often just carry you through higher end content. But again, this rolls with Demolitionist, so we can actually utilize in the same way we're using Salvager Salvo, just in our kinetic slot. I personally prefer Salvagers just because chain reaction is incredibly good at ad clear, and those chain reaction kills also will benefit from Demolitionist. So I feel it's better at generating grenade energy than something like Ignition Code, but again, this is out there and you can get some really, really good rolls with it. Again, it can come with blinding grenades as well, which is almost in and of itself an entirely new reason to use this grenade launcher over Salvagers, and it's something I highly recommend. The next weapon I am recommending, Chroma Rush. And Chroma Rush is again a new seasonal weapon here, and it can roll with a very, very large amount of perks. So if you don't get this or you still don't have it, do not feel bad. It often takes a lot to get a lot of different rolls, and there are actually a few different ones I can recommend. The main reason we're looking at Chroma Rush is it rolls with a new mod called Adrenaline Junkie. And Adrenaline Junkie essentially states that grenade final blows grant bonus damage and increased handling for a moderate duration. Now the handling, I really don't have an exact number on, but I will say it is extremely noticeable, especially at ×3, whenever you can just have basically insta swap on any weapon. Also, the bonus damage is actually quite substantial. At 1 stack of Adrenaline Junkie, it's a 10% damage increase. At ×2, you then have a 20% damage increase, and then at ×3, you have a 35% damage increase. And this is again for 10 seconds, and it will refresh on grenade kills. So again, this whole build benefits from grenades on multiple fronts. And at the end goal, we're trying to get as much damage as we can, clear as many ads, get our super back as fast as possible, and just rinse and repeat, and dip back into those perks to increase the potency and frequency of our Thunder Crash. Those are the primary two I'm going to recommend. Again, for energy weapon, I'm primarily going to recommend Salvage or Salvo, but if you wanted to use something like Ignition Code in the kinetic slot, I definitely recommend the Ikilos SMG. In my opinion, it is still one of the best primaries for PvE in the game, incredibly potent and can spawn Warmind cells, so if you wanted to incorporate a Warmind cell build into this somehow, you totally can. And again, it can roll with Demolitionist, so if you have a nice Ikilos SMG you want to use, you can totally use that with something like Ignition Code, with Demolitionist on that, double dipping into that perk, as well as with blinding grenades, and really have a potent combo. Weapons for the heavy slot actually have a few recommendations. The first and easiest is Anarchy, just to utilize Breach and Clear. Again, it is a pretty decent debuff for PvE, and it's really important when we're using our super to have that debuff to utilize the maximum damage with our Thunder Crash. So if we use something like Anarchy and the frequency and duration that it actually sticks onto enemies and can proc, Breach, and Clear throughout that entire duration, you're basically guaranteed to get that debuff whenever you use your super, as it can stay there throughout the entirety of that Anarchy on whatever boss you put it on. But for those of you who are looking for other options, the first thing is the seasonal machine gun, the Shattered Cypher. Mine comes with Adrenaline Junkie and auto-loading holster, but again, we're mainly utilizing Adrenaline Junkie here for today. I will say this is a 900 RPM machine gun, meaning this thing shoots as fast as Recluse, meaning this is a bullet hose. You're constantly going to be spraying out ammo. You're going to be chewing through it quite a lot. So if you want to rock reserves, I highly recommend it. A few other noteworthy things is this can also roll with heating up, which whenever you get a final blow, it increases the accuracy and stability of this weapon, dramatically improving the vertical recoil. So it really helps rein in that 900 RPM fire rate, which really has some kick to it, especially if you're playing on controller, as I briefly tried it, and it's very, very noticeable. But again, I'm using a backup mag with it, and I get 95 rounds. So this thing just mows through ads. But again, that recoil is a little bit tricky. So if you want to try, I would recommend going for Adrenaline Junkie with this build, as well as heating up, just to kind of rein in that recoil from those 900 rounds. The other one, and the one I unfortunately do not have, but I am begging everyone to look for, is the Vault of Glass Corrective Measure machine gun. The main reason is not only can this roll with Adrenaline Junkie like some of the weapons that we've discussed today, but it can also roll with Adrenaline Junkie and Demolitionist. And I really don't think I even need to point out why that is insanely busted with this build. Not only are you benefiting from the grenade damage bonus from Adrenaline Junkie, increasing the base damage of a machine gun, which is already fairly good for PvE, and the general handling of the weapon, but you can then proc Demolitionist with it, and you get your grenade back even faster. This is something that can chain and again benefit your super, benefit your grenade, your overall damage output. This is an insane weapon, and if you are regularly running VOG, this is something you need to watch out for because it's that crazy. I do have one friend who was lucky enough to get this roll, and while he hasn't used a Thunder Crash build with it, he's done something similar on his Warlock, and it is insane how fast you can get your grenade back with something like this with a lot of ads in the area, on top of receiving an already immense damage bonus on something hitting as hard as a 450 LMG in the game. But yeah guys, that's pretty much the build. A little bit has changed since last time, primarily with the weapon choices, And again, there's a lot of different options you can have here, and it's very possible to roll something like Demolitionist and Adrenaline Junkie in all 3 columns at the same time if you wanted. So I encourage you, play around with this build, use an Aikilos weapon, and maybe incorporate something with the Warmind into this. You can use, for example, Ignition Code with Blinding Grenades, really help out with higher tier content. Instead of using something like Charged Up to get to ×5, switch it out with Blast Radius, and now double the effects of Blast Radius for getting charged with light. There's a lot of different ways that this build can go, and again, we're utilizing Breach and Clear with CUIRASS and Thunder Crash to do one of the highest burst damage options in the entire game. This build has ad clear, this build has boss killing potential, and overall it's just insanely fun to use. I really enjoy doing builds like this simply because of the change of pace from Warmind cells and other build mods that we often have that sort of dominate the scene. This is incredibly fun. I use this basically anytime that I can, and I encourage you to try it out for yourself. So if you guys liked the video, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below. Let me know if you have any other comments or recommendations for future content, as I really enjoy making build guides like this, and have a few ideas for further down the road, especially with seasonal mods and seasonal weapons. But let me know what you guys think, and thank you so much for watching.